Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining today's General Membership Meeting of the Management Association of the Philippines on integrating ESG in the way we do business. My name is Agnes Hervasio, and I am the MC for today's GMM. Please settle down comfortably. We will now begin our program. May I request everyone to pause and bow our heads for a short prayer to be followed by the Philippine National Anthem. Our most merciful God, we come to you in our weakness. We come to you in our fear. We come to you with trust, for you alone are our hope. We place before you the disease present in our world. We turn to you in our time of need. Bring wisdom to doctors, give understanding to scientists, endow caregivers with compassion and generosity. Bring healing to those who are ill. Protect those who are most at risk. Give comfort to those who lost a loved one. Welcome those who have died in your eternal home. Stabilize our communities. Unite us in our compassion. Remove all fear from our hearts. Fill us with confidence in your care. We also pray for the eternal repose of the souls of the following MAP members. Mr. Baltazar Bal Endriga. He was MAP Treasurer and Governor in 2007 to 2008. MAP Assistant Treasurer in 2004, MAP Governor in 2003. He is the President and Founder of Meridian International Business, Arts and Technology, or MINT College. He passed away on May 10, 2022 at the age of 82. Likewise, pray for Joselito Jojo Uligan, Division Vice President for Operations of Alorica, who passed away on April 22nd, 2022 at the age of 50. Amen.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiliw, kaya sa silanganan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang binirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manluluping, di ka pasisigil, sa nagatang tutok sa simoy at sa langit kong pagaw, ay hinagang tula, kawit sa pagkayang minamahal, ang isang ng matawad mo'y tagumpay na nagkikinig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan ang ay di magdidinig. Lumanang araw ng waragit pagsingka, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang inigaya na pagkay mga amin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Thank you. May I now call on President of MAP, who is also the lead independent director of SM Investments Corporation, to deliver his welcome remarks. Please welcome Dr. Fred Pascual.
Thank you. Our speakers, Mr. Andrew Chan, Mr. VINCENT KNEEFEL, and Ms. ANTONIA YULO LOYZAGA, distinguished guests from the government, the diplomatic circle, the academia and media, fellow MAP members, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the Board of Governors of the MAP, I would like to welcome you to the MAP General Membership Meeting. This is our first GMM after the recently completed national elections. But the election results will not be the subject of our discussions at this meeting. Suffice it to say that we were involved in a non-partisan way by supporting the civil society organizations that have been our watchdogs and our citizens' participation in ensuring the integrity of our election. I'm referring to PPCRB, NAMFREL, and LENTE. In today's GMM, our speakers will tackle our corporate sector's challenge of integrating ESG in the way we do business. In our discussions, I hope we will be provoked and eventually influenced in our decisions and actions on building back better from the pandemic. ESG is in line with the third major thrust of the MAP theme for 2022. This theme, as you may see in my background, is about push for change towards a better future for all. And the main thrust I'm referring to is on shared prosperity and sustainability. With this thrust, MAP aims to push for actions that will strengthen business commitment to environmental sustainability, social justice, good governance, and stakeholders' interests, namely employees, customers, suppliers, communities, and shareholders, through ESG initiatives and disclosure. While corporate social responsibility, or CSR, has been laying the foundation for ethical corporate behavior, ESG has been leapfrogging CSR and is now at the top of the corporate agenda. ESG programs have become more popular than ever, spurred by key trends in countries around the world. And in terms of legislative actions by governments, aggressive carbon neutrality targets, and task force creation. Regardless of the approach, the business case for ESG and sustainability can be framed in various ways, and we hope to be enlightened in our discussions about this from the presentation of our speakers. A strong external value proposition in business can reduce the risk of government regulatory intervention and engender the support of our stakeholders. By paying attention to ESG issues, companies can make better decisions with their capital. Talking of the past election, MAP is now in the process of preparing the proposed MAP policy reform agenda for economic dynamism to be presented to the incoming new administration. Through the policy reform agenda, MAP will push for vital policy reforms through executive or legislative action to sustain economic recovery, attract more local and foreign investments, improve the ease of doing business, and create more jobs, particularly in the countryside. The MAP policy reform agenda will cover issues, among others, agriculture, ease of doing business, education, energy, finance, health, ICT, infrastructure, labor and employment, science and technology, and trade and industry. In the third and fourth quarters of this year, MAP will invite newly elected or appointed national officials for policy dialogues as they take their positions following the election. If possible, we will resume our practice of having in-person personal conversations with these government executives. Otherwise, we will meet virtually as the way we're doing now. Let me report on some of the activities that we have recently completed or started. First, the SGV MAP program for NextGen. I'd like to congratulate the 14 MAP NextGen members who are now participating in the second SGV MAP NextGen CEO Transformative Leadership Program. The second edition of the 10-month interactive leadership program will help MAP NextGen members become innovative and transformative leaders who can redefine their respective industries and is consistent with SGV's purpose to nurture leaders and enable businesses for a better Philippines. There is also a manifesto prepared for the next gen, but I will not cover this at our meeting today. Another important event which is upcoming is the MAP CEO conference. Please mark your calendars on this. It will be on September 13. And the theme will be the winds of change. Winds meaning victory. Winds of change, thriving in a world of in-betweens. The other important event that's coming up is the MAP Next Gen Conference, scheduled for November 11. And the theme will be the generational shift, mindsets, motivations, management. I'd like to report also that we have issued statements and co-signed letters with other business groups. So far, MAP has issued by ourselves or jointly with like-minded organizations 11 statements in support of MAP thrusts. Other topics of the statements are the election, energy security, RCEP, ease of doing business, and amendments to the Public Service Act. Today, we'll also formalize our relationship with the Benita and Catalino Yap Foundation, or BCYF, on social and community development areas such as, but not limited to, CEO breakfast and various BCYF CSR-related activities. BCYF and MEP have worked together for many years on various projects and activities, but we will formalize our relationship at this meeting. We are continuing our discussions with the De La Salle University Animal Labs on an MOU that will cover possible research on shared prosperity that will help us further pursue the implementation of this covenant that we have signed 2 years ago. An upcoming activity is the Ease of Doing Business survey, which we're doing in coordination with PwC Philippines. I would encourage our members to support this survey by responding to the questionnaire. There are many other activities coming up. Please keep an eye on your emails, Viber inboxes, and MAP website to keep track of our upcoming activities. Thank you very much and good afternoon. Keep safe and healthy.
Thank you very much, President Fred. At this point, may I request all our inductees to open your videos, if not yet done, for the next part of our program.
Yes.
For the presentation of new MAP members for online induction, I would like to call on the chair of the MAP Membership Committee, who is the chair of the Far Eastern University, Mr. Gigi Montenola.
Yeah. Good afternoon, fellow members. We're pleased to recommend 6 people. Actually, they've already been approved, and this will bring our total number of members to 1,070. Can you please share the screen so we can read? Okay. Our first proposed new member is Ms. Elizabeth de Guzman Dantes. She's president and CEO of the De Los Santos Medical Center, which is under the MVP Group. The line of business is healthcare management, and her sponsors are Ramoncito Fernandez and Atty. Francis Lim. Second name is Michael Escaler, president and CEO of All Asian Countertrade Inc. Line of business is a trading company that helps reduce the market risks of sugar in industrial users. Sponsors are Cesar Campos and Atty. Francis Lim. The third is Mr. Rafael Pete Felix, President and CEO of FINMA Property Holdings Corporation. Line of business is medium and high-rise housing development. Sponsors are Attorney Francis Lim and Dr. Alfredo Pascual. The fourth is Professor Victor Andres Lindo Manhit, a founder and managing director of the Philippine Strat-Based Consultancy, Inc. The line of business is international and strategic research organization addressing the issues that affect the Philippines and East Asia. Sponsors are Dr. Alfredo Pascual and Attorney Francis Lim. Next, we have Mr. Avin Ko Ong, founder, chair, and CEO of the Fredley Group of Companies. The line of business is restaurant and cafe management. And the sponsors are Dr. Donald Lim and Mr. Aurelio Montinola III. And then our last approved member is Attorney Jose Miguel Palarca, Managing Partner, Palarca and Baluyot Law Offices. Line of business is legal services. Sponsors are Dr. Donald Lim and Attorney Francis Lim. So congratulations. Well, we're going to have the induction, which will be handled by our president, Dr. Alfredo Pascual.
Thank you, Gigi. I now request our inductees to please raise the right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Michael Escobar,
Do hereby solemnly pledge
do
hereby
hereby
solemnly
solemnly
pledge
that I will perform well and faithfully
that
I
I will perform well and faithfully
to the best of my ability
to the best
the best of my ability
my duties as a regular member
my
duties
duties
as
as
a
a regular
regular
member
in order to contribute
in
in
order
order
to
to
contribute
contribute
to the achievements of the objectives
the
achievement
achievement
of the objectives
of the Management Association of the Philippines.
of the
of the
management
Management
Association
Association
of the
of the
Philippines.
Philippines.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations to you all. Welcome to MAP.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gigi, and thank you, Fred. Welcome to MAP, to our new members.
Yes, congratulations to all the new members.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Before our program proper, we will now have the signing of the MOU between the Benita and Catalino Yap Foundation, or BCYF, and MAP on various CSR activities. May I ask the signatories and the witnesses to turn on your videos now, please. At this point, may I now call on the following signatories. Representing MAP is MAP President Fred Pascual. Representing BCYF is BCYF Executive Vice President Antonia. Witnessing the signing are MAP ESG Committee Overall Chair Popoy Del Rosario and BCYF President Toni. BCYF and MAP have worked for many years on various projects and activities, such as the CEO Breakfast and Policy Fora. The MOU represents the agreement to continue working together on various social and community development areas, such as, but not limited to, the CEO Breakfast and various CSR-related activities. At this point, may I now request our signatories and witnesses to please make sure that your videos will show you holding the MOU close to your chest. May I now request our secretariat to execute the photo op. Please smile while the secretariat is taking the screenshots.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Another one, please. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Toni.
much.
Thank you.
Finally, we did it.
Thank you very
Don.
much.
Thank you.
Here are some reminders, please, before we proceed with the presentation of our speakers. As participants for this GMM, your audio and video are automatically off. Please submit your questions through the Q&A box that you see on your screen. With the assistance of our MAP Secretariat, I, as moderator, will read the questions on your behalf. You will only be able to see the program participants, but you will not be able to view the other attendees. In line with MAP policy and in the interest of time, we will dispense with the lengthy introduction of our speakers and reactor. Their profiles, however, will be flashed on the screen. I would like to remind our speakers that you are each given 15 minutes for your presentations. May I now call our first speaker. Please welcome the Asia Pacific leader in ESG of PW Malaysia, Mr. Andrew Chan.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me just click to the presentation. Okay, I'm delighted to be back speaking to Matt. It's been a number of years since my last session. I think it was at your annual meeting, and before the pandemic. So fantastic to be back, and thank you for the kind invitation. So I will be supporting the theme of the discussion today, specifically focus on how do we better integrate ESG to have a greater impact. This is an area that myself and PWC are very passionate about. How do we actually embed ESG better into our businesses? So to set the context, I'd like to share that from our recent Asia Pacific CEO survey and our net zero report. The links are down there in the source at the bottom. If you want to see more details, what we've noticed is a trend. So across Asia Pacific, we have greater than the global average commitments to net zero. Okay, I'm using net zero as an indication. But in supporting that commitment, we're actually lower than average when it comes to linking our financial performance to targets such as net zero. So this is helping to make my first point, which is we have strong commitments to the sustainability agenda at the strategic and the senior levels. But we're not seeing that cascade through the organization. So this is the theme that I'll be focusing on because we're talking about better integrating ESG for impact. To further underline that, we would say that generally across this region, companies are well onto the reporting journey. Many companies have a sustainability report, but again, it's the content in those reports that needs to be enhanced further. So we cover the general areas, talking about the principles and the materiality of our reports and of the sustainability agenda, but the content in terms of the accuracy and clarity are lagging behind. So summarizing this in terms of a mental framework to guide you, basically what we're seeing is action at the top and bottom of this triangle. So we're seeing strong targets and commitments being made towards the sustainability agenda. Now, at the strategic level, we'd also put the materiality assessment at the strategic level. What are the issues, relevant issues for the business to focus on? And then we support it by having sustainability reports and disclosures. However, we are reaching that point where companies who feel, yeah, we're doing enough on sustainability. We've got our targets, we've got a strategy that we're aligned to, and we're disclosing. Why is our ESG rating not improving? Why are we still getting asked questions from investors around the same things? What is actually missing? So this is a plateau we are seeing many companies reaching at the moment. What is missing is enough substance in the middle 3 dimensions of this framework. So it's not that we do not have sustainability initiatives. We have plenty of sustainability initiatives, and we have many that are more philanthropic or CSR in nature. But do stakeholders see how those initiatives are aligned to the strategic focus? Do we show them that clarity? In many cases, that clarity isn't there. And then do we have the right measures to support the achievement of strategy? On a broader basis, on the ESG agenda, on the G, we at PwC have been doing board effectiveness reviews for well over a decade now, assessing how the board actually performs in line with global good practice, at least on a 3-year basis. That is assessed externally. When we talk about the G and the governance, one of the things we talk to the board members about is purpose of the company. Prior to the pandemic, it was probably a 30-second discussion at best around the purpose of a company, basically a nodding of heads and saying, yes, the purpose of the company is important. We are focused on purpose. However, similar questions during the pandemic, there's been a lot more introspection, reflection, and I'd say probably extended from a 30-second response to a 5-minute discussion, and board members acknowledging purpose is critical, yet the reporting that we get from management team is always focused on financial targets. Maybe there's some compliance related elements there, but mostly financial targets. We actually don't have a set of metrics to tell us how we're doing against our purpose. So do the metrics really tell the story to back up your sustainability strategy? And it's beyond just saying you have something in place. Many will say we have a board committee on sustainability, or one of our board committees oversees the sustainability agenda. That's great. But what we're looking at for the next evolution of maturity is tell us how effective that board committee is. Maybe on a simple basis, just say, how many times a year did they discuss the sustainability agenda? Maybe that board committee meets 10 times a year. Did they discuss twice? Did they discuss 8 times? Was it on every single board committee agenda? So start to give a bit more substance and credibility rather than saying we have these things in place, show they are working. And that brings me to the final component, which is the enablers, structure, processes, procedures. We've talked about structure around the governance side of things, policies and procedures. How many can say that their procurement policy includes ESG considerations? For example, we have worked with a telco company. For every procurement over around $100,000 US, they put 25% weightage on ESG factors. How many do that? On the people agenda, the next wave that we're now seeing is what are the KPIs around ESG that should be set for senior management and directors? Of the FTSE 100, and this was our survey last year, of the FTSE 100 last year, 45 of the FTSE 100 companies' CEOs had ESG KPIs linked to compensation. This is a topic we're seeing raised more and more now in Southeast Asia. In Malaysia itself, which is where I'm located, under our Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance, recently reviewed last year, has included expectations on defining ESG KPIs for board and senior management. It doesn't explicitly say linked to compensation, but it does say KPIs. So these are the enabling layers where it fills in the gap between the strategy layer and the disclosure layer. And I'm going to go into this in more detail, but this is the framework that we're going to use just for the rest of my sharing. As an illustration, of how this is done, this is CDL in Singapore, a property developer. And I noticed just from the new members that you're joining, you also have property developers, and you've got over 1,000 members. So hopefully the examples I flagged to you give you a good cross-section of MAP's own member base. But what does CDL do well? This is linking on the strategic agenda as well as the metrics. You can see from the list of targets here, you can see on the left-hand side, they also have the sustainable development goals highlighted. But it links through to the targets as well as the performance. So there is clear linkage. At our strategic level, we have set these targets. And then these are the metrics are specifically linked to our targets. This is how we're doing. We have some greens highlighted. There's some amber there as well. So there's transparency on how that linkage and performance to the overarching strategy. Okay, no more of the disconnect between saying we've got a nice target and strategy, but what we're saying in our report doesn't really link to what we've committed to. Okay, so that's the first thing to highlight. Further illustrating this in terms of where metrics can head towards, which is emerging best practice, although I'd say it's been emerging for a number of years now, is going back to the purpose of a company and saying, what really measures the purpose of a company? Is it really your P&L and your balance sheet and your annual reports? Is it really that? Are board members satisfied with that? From our experience, as I've mentioned, board members are increasingly saying, no, we're not satisfied with that. So Axiata, who's a regional telco, has started measuring what they call national contribution. Every company has a socio-economic impact. It's not just a financial return to the shareholder. We have a socio-economic impact. How do we start measuring that and demonstrating our contribution to the economies and to the national agenda that we operate in? So Axiata's way of doing that, they talk about the total dollar investments in the respective countries. They talk about direct and indirect job creation. And they talk about their total contribution to GDP from a GVA perspective. So this is one way of doing it. Okay, but if you imagine, if any of your members are operating in multiple countries, if you're able to engage with the governments, the regulators, the tax authorities, and say, by us investing in your country, we've created X number of jobs, we're supporting this much tax contribution, could we have some additional support from tax incentives? That is a much stronger negotiating position. Okay, so that's an indication of measures. If we move on and talk about some of the initiatives themselves, what defines a good initiative? Well, first of all, is the point I mentioned about the strong linkage back to your strategy and clearly compartmentalizing what your initiatives are designed to do. What strategic focus area that you've committed to is your initiative supporting? Or if it doesn't support any of those, is it clearly labeled that it's philanthropic efforts? So you don't get accused of greenwashing. Second point is transparency on how you're performing on your initiative. What we've highlighted here is Nestle. For them, this is just one example, they launched an online human rights training tool. And what they have shared is a little bit of the shortfall around why they couldn't achieve as much as they wanted to achieve. So they recognize we're not perfect. We're not just telling you all the good news. We're not doing the greenwashing. We also didn't achieve some of what we set out to do, but here is the reason why. And how are we going to address that moving forwards? So that accountability for your initiatives and your commitments, even if you're not achieving it, you're committed to get it done. How are you going to do it? An example of the enablement layer, I've taken a couple of examples from regional banks here to show and illustrate my point. You can see on the left-hand side here, by CIMB, they've highlighted. We have board level and we have management level forums to engage on sustainability. This is the frequency, and this is how often climate was included in the discussions. Okay, so it's more than what you see in many disclosures. It's more than you'll see in many disclosures, which basically tick the box and say, yes, we have set a responsibility at the management and the board level for sustainability. Job done. What this is saying is these committees are tabling climate change topics. Okay, even better practice is to give a rough indication around what those discussion areas are about. Okay, rough area because of confidentiality, so keeping it to a higher level. Also on the enablement, this is an example of Volvo who engages with its suppliers. So it's not just about talking about the company's own value return back to shareholders, but also saying, how are we engaging with our suppliers? Every company has broader responsibility through its own value chain. How are we engaging suppliers on this whole transition to lower carbon economies? We cannot leave the suppliers behind. So Volvo puts a lot of trust in its suppliers. So instead of Volvo conducting the assessment, Volvo provides their suppliers a self-assessment. But for accountability, it retains the right to conduct supplier audits. Okay, and best practice, what we're seeing in terms of the engagement with suppliers and to manage issues like human rights through the supply chain is to actually proactively share with the suppliers. These are the commitments and the targets that we ourselves are under pressure to deliver. How can we work with you as some of our key suppliers to deliver on our commitments? What does it mean if we can do this together? Okay, are we prepared to do a bit of risk sharing? Are we prepared to give you more commitment to longer term relationship? If you're reducing our risk by committing yourself as our supplier to also put in place certain policies to reduce ESG risks. And then my final point really is cascading this across our business functions. How many of us can say that our corporate functions understand what their role is in delivering the sustainability commitments and strategies? Just to illustrate that point, at the biggest scale, an international oil company, now they call themselves International Energy Company, but an international energy company, the CEO in Europe, makes very strong commitments to net zero. But when we were engaging with their Asia Pacific procurement hub, and we asked, how are you as a procurement hub supporting the company's overall net zero commitments? They weren't. They hadn't yet factored it in. Okay, so that authenticity and that coherence of embedding sustainability throughout the organization's response. Okay, and this cuts across every function. We haven't put everything here, but you could have internal audit here as well, and so on. Every single function has a role in supporting your sustainability response. It is not the role of that handful of people or your virtual team allocated with the responsibility for sustainability. It is everyone's business. So just some final thoughts on that, and happy to take questions through the Q&A. So what we've seen good positive commitments at the top level on the sustainability agenda. We have seen commitments to disclosures as well. But what we really need to see is an uplift of the linkage of the actions you're taking with the strategy and the targets. And then we need to see how the rest of the organization is involved in the sustainability response so that it's holistic. By doing that, it will result in a step change in your ESG performance. You'll likely see that across the ESG ratings and the indices that you're being assessed against as well. I hope that was good food for thought. Again, happy to take questions later. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chan. At this point, may I call on our second speaker. Please welcome the Circular Economy Director of Plastic Card Exchange, Mr. VINCENT KNEEFEL.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction, Agnes. I'm actually based in the Netherlands, so it's a little bit earlier here. Let me share my screen. Yes, so my name is VINCENT KNEEFEL. I'm the Managing Director of Plastic Credit Exchange Solutions, and we're a Philippines-based organization that was founded by Ms. Nanette Metwitpo. I'll talk a little bit more about, I think, a very concrete type of initiative that falls under ESG. And I'm sure that you're already quite familiar with the issue of plastic itself. But let me just dive into this a little bit deeper to really sort of drill down like what the issue is and how we think that businesses should adapt to this. So the size of the plastic problem really is astounding. We've all seen, the footage on TV of marine litter. It's become a mainstream issue, but really in the last 5 years, this issue has only been growing even more. So if you look at all the plastic that is currently on our planet, that adds up to over 8 billion tons. And that means that plastic is either in landfills, it's in the environment, or it's in circulation. And because plastic is such a useful and cheap good to use, the amount of plastic that we continue to add also grows. However, the issue, of course, is that the end of life opportunities for plastic, at least at the moment, are still very limited. So historically, if we look, only 9% of all plastic has been recycled. And 12% has been incinerated, which basically means that it's been burned either for energy recovery or not. The remainder of the plastic finds its way into landfills and nature. And that is really problematic for multiple reasons. Not only is it damaging the ecosystem, it's causing biodiversity loss. Marine mammals are ingesting plastic at higher rates than ever before. But beyond that, it's also impacting humans at every level. People who are breathing the smoke from plastic that's being burned, but even all of us are ingesting plastic on a daily basis. WWF did a study that on average, anyone on the planet ingests the same as a credit card of plastic every week. And these are microplastics that we ingest through food, water, and air. So it's quite scary because we don't really know the health consequences of this yet. And then finally, this also means that there's a large financial risk for companies all around the world. This estimate of 100 billion is, I think, very conservative. It was a study last year from UNEP. There's others that actually estimate this to be far greater. So the good news is that we are seeing change coming and more people taking this issue seriously. Obviously, we're seeing consumers that are demanding, for example, better packaging or using less plastic. We're seeing that there's regulatory trends. So the introduction of EPR systems, such as in the Philippines, that are already holding producers more responsible and helping to then drive more recycling and reuse of plastic in the system. There was also recently at the UNEA 5 meeting in Kenya, an initial agreement that could lead to something very similar to the Paris Climate Agreement, but then for plastics. And that would mean that eventually there will be a binding agreement between countries on how much plastic, for example, will be produced and used all around the world. And finally, the topic that is most related to our meeting today, around ESG. And this is also a topic where we are seeing investors taking notes to the plastic problem. on the E of ESG and environment, I think we all see that most of the attention until date has been on climate, but that scope is definitely broadening. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, because like, what can companies actually do to take a step in this, and what are their options, essentially? So just to take a step back and to look at this from a systems perspective, what you see in front of you is sort of the value chain of plastics, right, all the way from the producers to the end of life. Now, this is a picture of sort of today globally, where we see that there's only very limited recycling, there's limited reuse, and the majority of plastics end up either in landfills, incineration, or leakage into the environment. And obviously that's something we need to change. And what we need to do is really twofold. On the one hand, we need to build a circular economy where most of the materials that we use are being recycled and reused. And at the same time, we really need to minimize the amount of plastics going into landfill, being incinerated, or leaking into the environment. And that is a major task, because it's not just about introducing either better materials or different products, but it's also about improving waste management infrastructure everywhere around the globe. And as you're probably well aware, in some countries, some of this infrastructure is already available. In others, there's nothing. So we need to build it from scratch. And that's also where even every company has to play a role. So I'll talk a little bit more about what we do at PCX. So Plastic Credit Exchange was founded around 2 years ago, like I said, by Ms. Net in a response to the local issue of plastics in the Philippines, with the idea of like, how can we get more funding into actual waste management where there's currently no regulation, or where the government is not playing a role yet. And that's how PCX came up with the concept of plastic credits. Plastic credits are very much modeled after carbon credits. But at the time, plastic credits didn't exist more generally. So PCX was the first to come up with plastic pollution reduction standards. And since then, we've sort of built out a system where there's funding going from companies directly to projects on the ground that are helping to collect and recover plastics, in a very similar way that you would see with carbon credits. Now, what we're currently working on is sort of the next phase, where we're looking to scale this beyond the Philippines to markets around the world. And we're building a marketplace also where companies can buy these credits in a meaningful and in a much easier way with projects from around the world. So how does this system work? I should stress that plastic credits are really only meant to be complementary to an existing strategy. So as Mr. Chen also laid out, this, like for example, that's cannot address otherwise. So what we do with PCX, we first would audit a plastic footprint of a company to really understand, where the footprint is, what kind of plastics we're talking about, volumes, and the geography of impacts. Based on those insights, we can help develop a strategy and really set concrete goals around reduction, elimination, but also recycling, reuse, and even alternative materials. In most cases, and for most companies, because of the limitations of the infrastructure that's available, they cannot go to zero, at least not right now. So while you're working on reducing your footprint, it's also a matter of taking responsibility for that footprint that you cannot address. And that's where credits play a role, because they basically help to offset that part of your footprint. And then what we do, once we've identified what the volume is, so let's say like it's 100,000 tons. Well, one credit is the equivalent of 1 ton of plastic. That would mean that they would have to purchase 100,000 credits. we then have an ecosystem of partners and projects from around the world that are cleaning up and recovering plastics in different ways. But we match those with the footprint of those buyers. We activate them, and once they have actually done their work, then we verify that that actually has happened, and we provide the confirmation to the buyer. That can then also make a claim against what they've purchased. So this is very much like a business expense. It's not by no means a philanthropic endeavor. The way that these companies also talk about this is eventually they want to become net zero plastic waste. So it's a longer term goal, but it already entails a commitment today. We are working actively with plastic credit projects from around the world. I lead PCX Solutions, which is our independent nonprofit, where we source the credits, we provide the eco-labeling, we consult with companies, and we provide our own standards. And then on the other hand, we have the for-profit marketplace that is really doing the brokerage, helping with pricing, and is ultimately selling those credits to companies in virtually every sector. As you may understand, the companies that are for who this is most relevant are companies that are in consumer-facing capacities. So think about fast-moving consumer goods, packaged goods companies that have a very tangible link. But we're definitely seeing also because of ESG that more and more companies further upstream understand that they're also linked into this and are also taking proactive action. Finally, before I close, this is not just about having a positive environmental impact. A lot of the projects that we're doing actually have a large social component because of the waste collection, and I'll show you an example of that just now. But that's also something to take into account, that this touches upon a lot more than just doing an environmental issue. One of our key criteria or sort of design principles is that anything that we do is verifiable and is audited by third parties. So we actually work in the Philippines, but also in other countries with companies like EY and PwC that are auditing both the plastic footprint of the companies that are buying the credits, as well as the projects that are delivering those credits, to really ensure that there's full transparency and that everything can be verified. If you go onto our website, you can also see our blockchain, which maintains all the latest information on any credit that's being sold. Yeah, and then finally, this is really about ensuring that the funding ends up in the right place. So companies are taking responsibility for what otherwise would be an externality, and are ensuring that funding goes to a project that would otherwise not have been funded. And ultimately, of course, we want to ensure that these systems are going to be fully self-sustainable and funded, also perhaps through EPR legislation. But in many, so that's why credits have a really important role to play. Just a quick overview of the impact that we've made so far. We have done over 30 million kilograms of plastic that's been collected and diverted from nature. We have over $2.5 million in investments. For the project that we work on there's been a large increase in income, and it has had many other benefits as well, all related to other ESG indicators. So this is the project that I just wanted to show you, and some of you may already be familiar with this, Arlington Dira, which is a women's network in the Philippines, which we're rapidly expanding, and essentially we're providing the operators of these stores with additional income through the credits. So they're collecting plastics that otherwise would not have been collected. So they're mostly low value soft plastics. We're providing them with a container, and we're giving them essentially money to to collect plastic from their communities. And then we're ensuring that that is being collected and processed after. So again, it's not just about the collection of plastic, but it's also about improving the livelihoods of the people who work on this. And some of them have really seen their incomes doubled because of this, what they're doing here. And this is directly funded through some major corporations, including PepsiCo. Yeah, so to conclude, we are facing a major crisis, but there are very practical things about it that we can do today. And I think the really positive news is that through ESG, more companies are now feeling sort of the heat to take action. And plastic credits is one of the most practical way to sort of take responsibility for footprints today, for that part of their footprint that they cannot address otherwise. So that's it on my side. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. KNEEFEL. Very interesting and definitely eye-opening. Our next speaker is the President of the National Resilience Council, Ms. Maria Antonia YULO Gonzaga.
Thanks very much, Agnes. Just a quick correction. That's LOYZAGA rather than Gonzaga. Thanks very much for that introduction.
Just apologies.
No worries. It happens quite a bit.
Thank you, Toni.
Just good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to say that we're very privileged to be part of this this afternoon's proceedings. We are not SR nor IR experts. However, we at the National Resilience Council are really from the outside looking in and looking at climate and disaster risk governance and resilience, and trying to see how that can be made part of the private sector's ESG agenda. May we have the first slide, please? So the National Resilience Council, just briefly, was organized in 2017 convened by the Ambassador Roberto Romulo, who saw the need to talk about mitigation and adaptation as well as resilience together. We are co-chaired privately and publicly by Mr. Hans C. and the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Delphine Lorenzana. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview, and I know we have 15 minutes, so I'll go very quickly through these slides. Some context, where we want to be, what challenges we see at the National Resilience Council in terms of integrating ESG into the way we do business, ways forward, and some next steps possibly for consideration. Next slide, please. So just in context, we look at the severe risks over the next 10 years, and that's really perceptions from the World Economic Forum. What we see is a shared future, where we want to go, SR in the Philippines so far, and of course, GAR directions. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So as you see here on the left-hand side, those are in fact the most severe risks over the next 10 years. Perceptions from the global survey that the World Economic Forum conducts, where you see what you see on the right-hand side are the realities for the Philippines. Really the kind of hazards we face in a very limited way. You see geo hazards as well as climate and meteorological related hazards. So these are in fact part of our realities in terms of risk. And when we look at impacts of our ESG strategies, actions, and metrics, we do need to consider what the context of our operations are. Next slide, please. So some key questions we ask ourselves at the Council. How do we survive and thrive? That's resilience in the face of shocks and uncertainties, while at the same time preserving and enhancing resources for the well-being of the planet and for future generations. What's the role of the private sector? How do we mainstream risk management and resilience and contribute to sustainability in the meantime? And how does sustainability make us not just bounce back or build back better, but bounce forward together? The transformative value of sustainability and resilience needs to be really highlighted at this point. Next slide, please. So where we are, as you know, very quickly on the landscape in terms of SR and IR in the Philippines, both of these are being used at the moment. But what we'd like to do is introduce, as part of the integration of ESG into the way we do business, the R into the ESG agenda. And that's just not creating shared value for all, not just SDG reporting and linking our targets, but really looking at resilience and how we invest in our core business value cycles and how we reflect disaster risk reduction, climate action for resilient development, so for the larger community, taking into consideration 3 major international commitments, and these are all embodied in national and local policy as well. The Sendai Framework, the Paris Agreement on Climate, and the New Urban Agenda. Next slide, please. So very familiar to all of you, and we are not the experts here. All of these, in fact, as part of corporate performance and contribution to national development, these are among the considerations currently at play. And so we're very keen to, in fact, add a little bit to that context. Next slide, please. Sustainability and reporting in the Philippines. Who's reporting what? We thought it would be good to actually show this slide. And thanks to Dr. Colin Hubo at UNP, we see that the property sector, holding companies, mining, for example, these are all major reporters of their sustainability. What we see here is a missing sector, and we hope that this is actually embedded in food, but the water sector, which is in fact the most sensitive to all the climate and other disaster risk that we face in the country. Next slide, please. The Global Assessment Report of the United Nations is actually its flagship project. And here's where this issue of Mr. Chan earlier on what our impacts are, how we report, how we craft our sustainability report, its context, and the metrics that we use in terms of monitoring our performance. In 2019, we shifted in the global arena from managing hazard impacts into evidence-informed, systems-based approaches in decision-making for risk. And where we want to be is in risk prevention rather than just in response, which you're all familiar with because of corporate activities in relief after disasters. Next slide, please. The finding of GAR in 2022 is really that we are not measuring what we value. Balance sheets actually ignore some key variables, particularly, I'll read from this slide, climate change risk, cost to ecosystems, positive social benefits of risk reduction. And they cite 2 key actions, rework financial systems. And that, of course, has an implication on ESG practice and adapting the national fiscal planning and risk financing to consider risk and uncertainty. Next slide, please. Some challenges we see to the integration of ESGR into the ways we do business at the moment. Next slide, please. How do we access the science we need for decision making? A lot of this has to do with identifying and understanding climate risk. Granularity is a very important factor here, and we need granularity in order to actually assess what types of climate risks we're facing. Next slide, please. We need to understand how climate change adaptation, not just mitigation, which is based on emissions reduction and energy efficiency, and emissions avoidance. Climate change adaptation is linked to disaster risk reduction management. So other hazards are part of the picture here. How do we then manage these compounded and cascading hazards in our future operations? Next slide, please. Understanding systemic risk and framing resilience is more about understanding contagion, interdependence, interconnectedness. How do we, in fact, manage our risk as it cascades across sectors and across scales? Next slide, please. And finally, in the transition towards net zero, what are the risks related to climate in terms of the physical impacts to operations, but also the cost of transition in terms of energy and other factors of our processes? Those in turn, next slide, please, have the capability of causing what we call financial contagion. So you have the physical risk drivers from climate change, but you also have now the ability of the cascading impacts to actually affect the economy and the whole financial system. Next slide, please. How do we move forward in terms of integrating ESGR into the ways we do business? Frameworks, approaches, and some tools. These are not by any means exhaustive, but we'd like to share these with the group today. Next slide, please. We need to understand that SDGs do not stand alone. In fact, in the 3 major international agreements now, there is emphasis on resilience by reducing vulnerability, from the intersection between the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and the Sendai framework. So we need to understand that the core of our risk and resilience is really understanding exposure vulnerability in terms of our businesses, operations, downstream with our supply chains, and the sources of our materials. And secondly, another framework to look into, next slide please, is the framework that is used by local governments. And I emphasize this because of course the national framework is in place, but local governments need to understand how interconnected the different pillars are in terms of achieving resilience at the local level. And this is a milieu that you all work within. And therefore, local governments and the local governance of risk are not just part of the political administration, the political administrative entity, but empowered stakeholders need to be part in integrated development planning along the different outcomes in order to achieve development continuity. Next slide, please. So in terms of approaches, first one, new and innovative partnerships. And we're grateful to be here to be able to present some perspectives today. Each of our geographies have different risk profiles, and these are dynamic and they're complex. We show here 3 risk profiles, really from social vulnerability in these cities that you see, but that's linked, of course, to root causes and drivers that have to do with the development transect, urban, rural, in between. Next slide, please. We need to build capacity for systems thinking. And that risk analysis that results from understanding how the different systems are interconnected and how systems either fail or in fact can succeed together. And so that systems thinking has a larger sectoral, of course, perspective, but it has to do also with the different scales within which the systems work. Next slide, please. Given that we need a multi-stakeholder approach and a nexus approach to risk governance and resilience. And here I show where the overarching frameworks are actually on top. The sustainability and integrated report factors and parameters are in one box, where the national resilience works with local governments and stakeholders, internal and external, and the map thrust actually intersect. Again, multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary, we need to work across silos. Next slide, please. So few tools. We need a science-based climate and disaster risk assessment for operations, for the resilience of where you work, where you source your materials, how the logistics are actually designed. And here you see an example of the province of Bataan, where it's actually mapped out flood and commercial establishments versus different hazards. And that will have to be revisited as climate change actually develops and causes some variability in the impacts locally. Next slide. There are tools already, and this is one innovative tool that we wanted to put forward today. This is part of the Spatial Finance Initiative, and it was presented by Oxford University as part of their studies in collaboration with the British government. And this actually has to do with measuring the impacts of corporations using space-based technologies and intersecting that with financial analysis to put valuation on impacts that the different corporations have, not just on the ecosystems, but also on the communities that they are located within. So spatial finance is actually an approach and a tool that actually is being now promoted in some of the developed countries because of the access to satellite imagery and the ability to do change detection and other types of analyses. Next slide, please. As presented by Mr. Chan, there are already contextualized solutions at scale and by sector. And so we have the audit and advisory firms to actually thank for this in terms of actually helping us to measure what the climate risk is, impact baselining, and then chart a pathway to net zero. The last 2 tools I will mention, next slide, please, are basic tools that we have developed, it translated and we're rolling out at this point for MSMEs. And this was the MSME tool for the quick risk estimation of the COVID risk that MSMEs have actually faced. Again, what's happened here is we have worked with Arise Philippines in order to translate this tool into Filipino and cascade this to MSMEs. We need quick risk estimation tools for MSMEs for multiple hazards, not just for COVID, and that the private sector can actually help in developing for the Philippines in a contextualized way. Next slide, please. Again, for MSMEs in the supply chain and value chains of companies, we need private sector support for the development of local risk financing tools, risk transfer instruments, really kind of social protection. And COVID has actually taught us this lesson. We need to be more involved in the social impacts of hazards, and that can be very easily integrated into the ESGR agenda of corporations. Next slide, please. Last few slides, just integrating, again, ESGR into the way we do business. Some next steps perhaps to consider for discussion. Next slide, please. We need to include a metric for resilience in the ESG accounting and transparency system. And really that has to do with adopting some science-based targets if we are in fact to move towards 1.5 degrees. Next slide, please. Mainstreaming climate change adaptation and disaster risk resilience into sustainability reporting is one way that we can actually begin integrating. We are already reporting on ESG and SDG linkages. This target 1.5 out of the no poverty SDG is one that we would like to help advocate for and promote as far as the corporate activities in the MAP are concerned. So hopefully not just mitigation, emissions avoidance, energy efficiency, pollution management, climate change adaptation, and disaster risk resilience are actually very important to our own survival as a planet. Next slide, please. The move to actually begin addressing externalities. How do we now reflect in our balance sheets and our income statements the impacts of our activities on third party, if you will, whether it's the ecosystem or whether it's the larger community. We have thoughts about area-based resilience here that can be part of investments in terms of the core business value cycle of corporations, and we'd be happy to share those with you. And lastly, next slide, please. Working with government. We really cannot escape working with government. And so we'd like to move forward and explore how the BSP, how the DOF, how the SEC can actually make climate finance in the Philippines more, how do I say, engaging of the private sector and eventually impact the whole of society. Thank you.
Very insightful. Thank you very much, Ms. LOYZAGA. At this point, may I now call on the governor in charge of the MAP ESG Committee, who is also the chair emeritus and ESG leader, PwC Philippines. He will serve as our Q&A moderator. Please welcome Attorney Alex Cabrera. But before we go to the Q&A proper, may I request for a short photo opportunity with our speakers and reactor. May I request Mr. Chan, Mr. KNEEFEL, Ms. LOYZAGA, Ms. Hilario, Attorney Cabrera, our President, Fred, to please open your videos. Is Mr. KNEEFEL still online? Mr. KNEEFEL?
Vincent? Are you with us, Vincent?
He may have dropped off because of the time
Yeah,
difference.
there you go.
Okay.
Marisa, please admit. Okay. Please.
Okay.
One,
Okay. For the
2, 3. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arnold. For the Q&A, take it away, Alex.
Yeah, thank you very much, Agnes, and good afternoon to everyone, all MAP officers and colleagues who who joined us this afternoon. Certainly, time well spent listening to our three resource speakers. You know, ESG, I would consider it as the most game-changing thing that happened to us since industrialization and digital transformation. And ESG is such an important imperative globally, but in the local scene, I would even go so far as saying that ESG is now a very important refuge because continuing the good things that we have done, regardless of political affiliation, is certainly one of the greatest consolations to our good intentions. And we cannot stop the momentum on ESG and shared prosperity that we have already started. So allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to begin this Q&A session by throwing the first questions. Andrew, I'll throw the first question to you. Well, you alluded to it that ESG is actually challenging the way companies are being valued, credit ratings, and even impacting the cost of capital. You mentioned something about Axiata as an example, beginning to scientifically measure its ESG contributions. But what have you observed so far among investors? What is the level of scrutiny that they put? Are they doing their evaluation scientifically, or are they satisfied about the target companies having in place some basic ESG policies in their business models?
Thank you so much, Alex. I will try and keep it to a crisp response, but there is such a wide spectrum of responses at the investor level. It's difficult to just give a generic response, but what I'd say is that the interest in investors is basically on an upward trend. That's the commonality. The pace of response is different. So things that make the headline are investors in the Western economies, the developed markets that might be saying no more coal financing. And it seems very black and white. And many of our investors in Asia region say, we can't do that. So there is a difference. But what is not helping that discussion is the lack of availability of the right range of metrics. Because our companies, our investors in this region will always say, but we have to think about socio-economic development. We're not at the stage of development of the Western economies, but most of our companies and investors don't have the metrics to show that. So when we're being criticized for high emissions without corresponding metrics of socio-economic impact generated as a result of the higher level of emissions, it doesn't support the argument to try and push back or encourage Western investors. Actually, whilst you say you may want to exit fossil fuels, the economic and social impact you have of supporting those industries in this region are multiple times higher than similar industries in the West. So do you want to rethink your stance on exiting that? And that's the challenge between developed and developing markets. So the range of spectrum, we have investors in Southeast Asia, institutional investors, so local, not the multinationals, that as much as 10 years ago, already started approaches to quantify how ESG impacts both shareholder value as well as the socio-economic impact. So already they said, the purpose of a company is measured beyond profit and loss and shareholder returns. We as a sovereign fund need to understand how to measure that. Because if we invest in a company that generates very high financial returns, but at the same time damages the health of our citizens, is that something we should be doing? Or are we willing to take slightly lower financial returns, but for industries and companies in those sectors that are not doing harm to our citizens?
Thank you, Andrew. like to talk a bit about supplier engagement and a bit connection to my earlier question. Is legislation pushing this in the developed countries? And if there's more supplier engagement there, is that a legal requirement or just part of the initiative to do good? I'm gonna ask Toni in a while to weigh in on this and on the Philippine PLCs. But what have you observed outside, Andrew, in terms of big companies or even listed companies or big companies which are not listed influencing the supply chain to adopt ESG policies?
This is where I give the Philippines a pat on the back, because whilst I look across the Asia Pacific region, the Philippines has taken bolder steps towards implementing EPR. So that's very forward thinking, and we're not seeing that degree of response on the supply chain side from the regulators at the moment. So what we're seeing across the rest of Asia Pacific is very much market-based response. And as you said, maybe Antonia and Vincent can say more given their perspectives, but we've seen more company-driven responses regardless of the regulation. So let's say global FMCG beverage companies, they've been working with us about their plastic and their packaging footprints across the Asia Pacific region. How do they decrease that more? And they said, yes, there's some regulation around percentage of recycled plastic to go into bottles. That's in some countries in Asia Pacific. Many countries don't have that though, but they want to try and achieve a minimum common denominator across their operations. And similarly, I've dealt with companies that said, look, our packaging waste, we can see it sitting in the countryside. We're a 100-year-old company. Our packaging waste is just lying in the countryside. We will not have the license to operate for another 100 years if that's the case. So regulation is driving different stages of response, but congrats to Philippines for pushing that forward. And then just the final point I'll highlight on supply chain is we are emphasizing this point to every client that we are engaging, that when you think about your commitments to net zero, carbon neutrality, and so on, you cannot look at these in silo. It is not just an environmental or a climate response. Let's forget about the social and economic impacts. You have to do this in conjunction. So we dealt with a national oil company and they said, we've got a net zero commitment, we'll work with our suppliers. I said, does that include SMEs? They said, we don't have SMEs in our direct supply chain. I said, hold on, you have thousands of SMEs in the oil and gas supply chain in your country. If you achieve net zero 2050 and you lose 80% of those SMEs, but you've achieved net zero, is that a successful net zero transformation? They said, no, it's not. Okay, let's include the SMEs in that conversation and see how to work with our tier 1, tier 2 suppliers to cascade that through the supply chain. So just those 2 points to flag out.
Thank you, Andrew. And turning to Toni. Well, Toni, we have only about 330 publicly listed companies in the Philippines. You can add entities with vested with public interest. But there's a code of corporate governance that applies to the 330. However, there's, based on PSA data, about 1 million business enterprises. And what's your view on, how much impact or can we feel the impact of these publicly listed companies on the rest of the potential value chain, their existing value chain, and the rest of the potential value chain in MSMEs? Will it make a dent, without that kind of legislation applying on the MSMEs? Of course, we have the Code of Corporate Governance for PLCs. Again, 330 versus 1 million. What's your view on that, Toni? Toni, you're on mute. You're muted.
Thank you very much, Alex. Perhaps picking up from where Andrew had left off, in the Philippines, we are dominated by SMEs. And so it is really the regulatory environment and the leadership of the publicly listed companies combined, as well as other stakeholders in the social milieu that need to actually bring everyone together. There is no way that the non-publicly listed, okay, so the private companies could be steered towards the ESG performance without the regulatory environment actually making that somehow mandatory. And so we need to move from voluntary disclosures and mandatory disclosures just for the public listed to also new legislation for SMEs. And there's no way that I think that we can move forward without actually having that external pressure in place. I do want to make a point though, Alex, on those that are not publicly listed and those that are SMEs. They are subjected to a different range of risks than the publicly listed companies, certainly by way of the size of their capital and actually the way they perform and their type of operation and type of business. And so we need to understand what will drive SMEs to actually perform in terms of sustainability, and then address that in terms of legislation, as well as, of course, providing the technical assistance needed in order for transitions to take place from the current practice to sustainability actions or climate action and resilience. So combination of factors. There needs to be a regulatory push. There needs to be leadership exercised by the publicly listed large corporations downstream along their supply and value chains, and those, in fact, social pressures that need to be applied given what's coming out of academia and then global best practice as well. So there's no easy answer, I have to say, at this point in terms of bringing in the non-publicly listed. Thank you.
Thank you, Toni, for sharing that perspective. Nonetheless, of course, the bigger companies also worry about costs being driven up. If there's more compliance in the supply chain, but it's not a matter of now or never. I think it's sooner or later we're gonna get there. Turning now to Vincent, and I think Vincent, you're one of the reasons why Andrew, I think, is impressed with the Philippines in terms of the advocacies that we're doing on ESG and your plastic credit exchange. The first thing that I would say is this such bravery. It's too daring for an organization to come up with plastic credits and push for plastic neutrality when there's no law requiring that. And what's really pushing you in doing that, apart from your advocacy, is actually trust that people care, or trust that corporations even care. Can you share with us, Vincent, what's the momentum that you've seen so far, is the traction that you've gained in terms of this advocacy?
Thank you, Alex, for that great question. Well, a lot of this is credit to our founder, Nanette Metzepo, who I think has done something that I think if you'd asked somebody 5 years ago would have been inconceivable. And one of the reasons I decided to join PCX as well is really because this was born and bred in the Philippines, right, in the heart of the plastic pollution crisis, or at least like one of the major hotspots. So I think really having that understanding of the local context is so important when designing these kind of initiatives. And the great thing is that we are seeing more global traction now based on what has been done in the Philippines. I think, as you rightly point out, this is still very much a voluntary initiative, and also to Tony's comment, this needs to happen in tandem with legislation, right? Voluntary initiatives by themselves are not going to be able to solve the plastic pollution crisis, but at the same time, nor is regulation by itself. And we've seen many cases of that. So I think this is such a great opportunity for the private sector to work with the public sector and with NGOs to take drastic action, right now, while at the same time also working on longer term goals. And I think that the one thing that's the one question that people always raise, right, if they talk about ESG or if they talk about more qualitative outcomes, is like, how do you measure this? And how do you actually show me that something has changed? And I think that's where plastic credits are such a great example, because everything we do is very valuable, and it ultimately results into the impact of one credit, which is 1,000 kilograms of plastic. So I think that system in itself has gained a lot of traction. Obviously, we're still working with a lot of brands that are more progressive and are sort of more forward-looking, taking action today and not sort of waiting until they have to take action. But we are seeing more and more companies come on board, and we're seeing more global traction. And that will be sort of our next phase, where we're already having conversations with over 50 global brands that have at least showed interest in the concept, and hopefully we'll be able to convert them to make really tangible commitments and develop a strategy, but then also take responsibility for their footprint today.
Yeah, it's actually genius, Vincent. Collecting the plastic trash there and converting it into a plastic credit. But that means you're not really stopping people from throwing plastic trash. You're collecting it and then converting it to plastic credit for exchange. What do you think of the UK approach, for instance, of tax on plastic packaging?
So I think taxation is one of the instruments that governments have at their disposal. But I think it's really important then that actual money goes to strengthening waste management. And in the case of the UK, it's merely an additional cost that is sort of passed on to the businesses and ultimately to consumers, but not necessarily changing the system itself. So what I would rather see is incentives towards more recycling or towards more collection. I would also add that it's not just about collecting the plastics. For example, the project Arlington Dira that I showed, by really sort of funding these kind of initiatives in the local communities, it's also sort of start off a conversation at the local level where then people are going to become more conscious about what they're doing with these plastics. And also are asking the question, should we even be using these questions in the first place? So I think it's also very much about changing social behavior and social awareness in the longer term.
Thank you, Vincent. And just for clarity, Vincent, the plastic that we're talking about here are the end-of-life plastics, but not the plastic containers, right?
Yeah, so the end-of-life plastics, and maybe just to give you a very specific example, right? Out of all the different plastic types, the one that's probably most problematic in terms of packaging are sachets. And it's really because of the way that these materials are sort of adhesed together. They're multi-layer materials, and therefore they're virtually impossible to recycle. Now, there's work being done on new technologies, but right now, from an economic and market perspective, there's not really an incentive to collect these materials if you would compare that to PET bottles, as an example. So obviously, that's something we need to solve for. And it's not just about collecting these materials, although that's something we need to do in the short term, but ultimately, it's also about shifting towards new business models where we will not be using sachets anymore. And that's all about having systems that can do refilling, reusing of materials. But to be honest, we're still at very early stages there. So we've only seen some very small initiatives that are actually able to address this, but not at a larger scale.
Thank you, Vincent. Turning now to Toni, and you mentioned the importance of government cooperation in this national resiliency, in fact. And I guess my question, Toni, is how important is it that government participates? I mean, does it spell the success or failure of the initiative that you're pushing. And maybe Toni, you can also talk about your experience working with local governments. Are they ready for this? How cooperative are they, or are they changing their mindsets? Go ahead, Toni.
Thanks, Alex. It is imperative that national and local government be actively participating in resilience. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity here for government to work with the private sector. And I see that there are initiatives that are already making inroads, I would say, and policies that are making inroads at the national level. The BSP, for example, has been actually actively developing the sustainable finance roadmap. And I think that that's something that we need to keep watch and definitely support as part of the financial sector. Secondly, the national government needs to embrace the resilience lens. At this point, it's very much an emergency response in effort as far as disaster risk is concerned. And so when we have a climate-related event, for example, or a hydrometeorological event like the typhoons, the government is ready to respond. But the question is, was there an opportunity to prevent a disaster? And the prevention there is a multi-stakeholder effort between the private sector, government, academia, CSOs. We all need to be part of that. So it's to answer the first question, national and local government, very important, actively participating. I have to say that the private sector has made many inroads in terms of its own evolution, as not just as a donor in terms of disasters, but really as investors and partners in the implementation of disaster resilience and climate resilience. And the example that VINCENT has actually put forward is one that's privately led. However, there are corporations, for example, that have led the way. I'll speak a little bit about that later, but talking about LGUs, there are LGUs that are ready. And those, particularly in the urban centers and some in the small islands that have actually experienced these disasters over and over, are actually now beginning to appreciate how they need to assume a systems lens in planning out their annual investment plan, their budget, and their projects and programs. So there are LGUs that are ready. I'll give you some examples. Bataan Province, for example, Iloilo City, Cagayan de Oro, Naga City. These are all provinces that we work on. And we're very grateful, Alex, I should say here, to PwC, because we measure the performance in terms of resilience. And PwC has extended, very, very generously its technical assistance in evaluating the metrics, the way they have submitted their performance in terms of the pathway to resilience. And so we're very grateful to PwC Philippines for that. So the whole issue really here is resources and the ever-present threat of COA not actually understanding how resilience cuts across different pillars of government. And therefore, when you spend on actually improving road drainage, it's not just for the road improvement, but actually is a disaster risk reduction and management expense. So that's a whole area wherein we're struggling a little bit with some parts of government not really understanding what resilience really means and what resilience investing means on the part of local governments. Having said that, if I may, Alex, just add a little bit about how the private sector has worked with local governments. And in this case, as external stakeholders, they have invested in infrastructure, for example, for flood management. They have invested in their own operations to become resilient and, in fact, impact the way hazards are managed in the different local governments. I'll give you one example, the SM Group in terms of engineering and design. Core business value cycle, 10% of all projects go into resilience. They are actively involved in flood risk management through engineering. And that's the sort of core business value cycle reflection that we're looking for that can be captured as well in the ESG performance and linked to resilience to climate hazards overall. that we're looking for in terms of the private sector's contribution to climate and disaster resilience. Lastly, the National Resilience Council works with 9 local governments, a province, municipality, and cities, but we are now working with 10 provinces as well and 2 special regions as part of an Australian government-funded UNDP consortium. And at this point, we see that there are various stages of readiness. So a lot of groundwork needs to be done. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Toni. And let me just say, in reaction to this one comment or question, that the National Resiliency Council and the PDRF and the organizations such as ARISE is probably the answer to this comment or question from a person which is, of course, impatient about this issue, as we all should be. Well, it says we don't need to worry about financial reports if the or any report for that matter if the earth kills us. And the only imperative really is to share all our resources so that we can save humanity. That's from Bobby.
Amen.
Yeah, so let me go to the question from our participants. A bit of, yeah, maybe I'll just ask it the way that they were asked, because some people have varying degrees of knowledge. Andrew, difference between ESG and GRI or GRI metrics? Andrew, would you please explain this to us like we were 6-year-olds?
I'll start drawing some pictures as well then now. Can't draw. So GRI stands for the Global Reporting Initiative. It's one of the sustainability frameworks globally. Now, if you ask me to start explaining all the sustainability frameworks, that's a different challenge. But the issue is there are so many ESG frameworks, sustainability frameworks out there. And that is causing a lot of confusion. And also friction to businesses, because often they are responding to multiple frameworks. It is being recognized, so globally there are movements to try to consolidate. So we're seeing the formation of the Value Reporting Foundation, COP26, there was the announcement of the International Sustainability Standards Board. So trying to create alignment. And we think it will happen faster than accounting standards have developed, which are still changing even after 100 years. But hopefully on the sustainability side, we are learning from the accounting regulations and guidance and trying to fast track, because we cannot wait 100+ years for response to environmental issues. When we talk about ESG, environmental social governance, so often when we talk about sustainability, we say that we are focusing around environment, social, and governance issues. Often the governance is interchanged with economic. There are camps that are not that keen on the usage of ESG because they say it can promote siloed thinking. Just the same as I highlighted, please don't look at commitments to net zero without thinking about the social and economic impacts. That's the disadvantage of using a term ESG, but it is much quicker to write than sustainability. So sometimes you just got to look at the bigger picture and say, okay, they are talking about sustainability overall. But yeah, I would say ESG is trying to encompass the breadth of the sustainability agenda, whereas GRI is one of the frameworks that you can use to support your response.
Yeah, might as well touch on the question also from Mr. Rex Drelon. Is trying to make sense of these overlaps in ESG, ESGR, or shared prosperity. You have any view, Andrew, on how to simplify what we should apply?
The simplest answer is looking at what goes closest to your purpose as an organization. And that really is the challenge all of us have, because whilst we all are proud to say we've got a purpose, we've got values in place, when it comes to our financial performance, we're like, maybe we should just park some of this purpose to the side because we need to focus on the profitability and the shareholders. That is always the challenge that C-suite are faced with, is getting that balance. So I would say whichever focus you decide to have, it needs to fit into what your values and purpose is. And the most important is make sure you back it up with the right metrics, with the right KPIs that you set your team, getting the organization involved in that. So it's more than just a nice statement and more than something that's written on a t-shirt, but your employees and your suppliers and vendors actually work together with you to help you make it real. That will have more impact than choosing any of those statements, but really making it happen.
Thank you, Andrew. I don't know who among you would have a view, but I'll start with Vincent. Question here from Mr. Paeng Reyes. He's actually trying to get your perspective on the doability of these 2030 targets. Do we have what it takes, to achieve, let's say, our decarbonization by 2030? And once you achieve it, how do you make it sustainable? Or you go back to your old habits once you achieve it? Maybe just a question of concern here from Mr. Paeng Reyes. Vincent, do you have thoughts on that, or any of our panelists?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question because we're really in a race against time. And, if we, in day-to-day business, sometimes it's hard to sort of forget how little time we actually have to solve these problems, right? Just imagine there's like, on average, maybe like 250 working days per year. We're already midway 2022. So we have roughly like 16 or 1700 working days left to actually achieve this goal, which on itself doesn't sound like a whole lot. I think the complexity, right? There's definitely overlap between the different crises, but the way that we go about them does need their individual strategies. And I think in ways the climate crisis is somewhat even easier to solve, even though it's super complex, than plastics. And in that sense, like we need to even work harder to actually achieve the results that we want to achieve. And we can only do that by working together. And I think that's sort of the partnership, right? Understanding that things don't happen in isolation, like Mr. Chan also stressed a couple of times really eloquently. It's just so important. Like ESG is about everything on this planet, from the environment to communities, to everything we do. So it goes way beyond the sort of the traditional bottom line of a company.
Do you believe in that doomsday scenario, the point of no return? If we don't decarbonize soon, there'll be a point of no return in the next 25 years.
Well, it's not that I believe in it, but it's more what the scientists are telling us,
yeah, right?
And if we look at already like our planetary boundaries and how we've exceeded many of them, if we look at the situation in our oceans, right, like warming oceans, but also changing chemistry of our oceans, which makes it a lot harder for ecosystems to actually thrive. We will be reaching tipping points, and in some cases we already exceeded them. But what we do today is going to be critical for generations to come. And I think the science speaks to that for sure.
Thank you. And Toni, you've worked on these weather issues as well, and the science behind it. And is there any indication from what we are experiencing in this recent weather that we're having, the very hot summer and the rain that you don't understand whether it's rainy season already or it's back to summer again? Is this to you an indication of the effects of climate change?
Well, putting me on the spot there, Alex. Certainly the scientists have said that the start of rainy season, the end of the dry season, those will in fact change. And we're seeing some of that already. I think what we also need to keep mindful of is the temperatures, which changes are actually maybe gradual, but we are seeing heat factors really rising, especially in the urban areas. And so changes in temperature, which may be only measurable in terms of range over time, I think are also very important to understand. People don't realize that the minimum temperatures are actually rising. And so when minimum temperatures rise, there are implications to food supply, especially to rice, for example, wherein, for every 1 degree change, it's been established that there will be a 10% decrease in yield for rice. Those are some of the linkages between climate and food security, for example, climate and water security, or energy security for that matter, that need to be kept in mind. The scientists are saying that we are not on track to keep to 1.5. And I think that should be a cause for concern for everyone, not just the large corporations, but everyone else as well. I also want to bring up the point that these climate-related hazards and hydrometeorological hazards really are not just the only ones that we need to be mindful of, and therefore we need to keep watch. Natural technological hazards, such as what happened, for example, in Fukushima, those rapid geological hazards, such as the major earthquakes, those will continue and will surprise us to some degree, I would think. And we do need to keep on track as well in terms of surveillance of biological hazards. So these compounding of hazards are what really is making our risk landscape very complex. And therefore, we need to be aware of how systems can actually fail, especially if they're interdependent or interconnected. And I think that should be part of our discussion, along with the net zero, which is very important, of course, to everyone, especially private companies.
Yes, and that's why it really makes sense that among the required disclosures will be the impact on the climate of the business. And Andrew, I think what have you observed are the recent accounting developments in this regard? I know that in the US there's already an exposure draft on what should be reported in the ESG reports of non-listed companies. Of course, there's none yet in the Philippines. What's required here are reports on things that contribute to risks, etc., and climate change, for instance, but not as broad as the ESG reporting requirements that are being circulated now for comments. Can you say something, Andrew, about what you've observed on these expected accounting reports or sustainability reports that are happening in developed countries?
Less my area of specialty, Alex.
All right.
Things like that. But on the carbon accounting side, we've obviously seen very good uptake of the GHG protocol, and I'd say getting close to standardization on how we talk about scope 1, 2, and 3. So that's a good move. You're right about more specific requirements. So let's say that the SEC, which has got everyone's attention, was it last month or the month before, made the commitment around climate change disclosures. So that will ripple through the global financial framework for anyone who's working with an SEC registrant. We are seeing more of that point focus around the climate change agenda. As mentioned, it's good, but it's also a bit of a shame because we're forgetting some of the labor rights and human rights areas, which, in the Southeast Asia region, unfortunately, I'm in a country which has now been downgraded to tier 3 in the US Trafficking in Persons report. We've got Thailand, which is tier 2 watch list. So we can't forget about some of the social issues, but the focus seems to be from the regulatory side, more climate focused at the moment. What I would also say, I think you alluded briefly to taxonomies. Taxonomies will help a lot, although they can also be overcomplicated. In EU, we've got 600 plus pages taxonomy. That's a lot to digest. The ASEAN capital markets regulators have released part 1 of their taxonomy, with part 2 to follow. Different central banks have also released their taxonomy, and other securities commissions across this region are developing, or some already have draft taxonomies that they're looking to release as well. The problem with everyone coming up with a different taxonomy is like having 20 different dictionaries with slightly different definitions. You might need a master dictionary to interpret between these different dictionaries. So I would say that the hope is there is enough alignment across the different taxonomies that it doesn't create more confusion, because that's the last thing we need. In addition to all these ESG frameworks already, you end up with a whole bunch of different taxonomies that if you're dealing with companies, banks, investors in different jurisdictions, everyone's got a slightly different definition. But I would say what we've seen so far is encouraging in that there is linkages at the principles level. So we're not seeing different definitions yet, but the risk can still be there.
Yep. Thank you, Andrew. We've come to that point where I'm supposed to give you ask you for your last statements, but if you don't mind, I'll pose a question. You can leave a last statement in relation to that question, starting with Andrew. Andrew, will this momentum be stopped? I mean, this ESG momentum globally, will it stall? Will it stop? What do you think will be the direction of this journey in terms of how fast things will happen?
I do like a song called Runaway Train for those of my sort of vintage. I would like to think the momentum has built and that it is not stoppable. I think we're on an S curve. You know, when we started the practice 15 years ago in Southeast Asia, it was hard going. Not many companies were willing to discuss sustainability. But it has really ramped up in the last few years. So I think we're in that S curve, we're trending up. We've already seen 80% of the global economy is under a net zero commitment. I don't think the momentum's stoppable. We've got the next generation coming through that, I mean, they're disenfranchised with some of our institutions, but they really want the change to happen. So I think we will see it happening.
Thank you, Andrew. And Vincent, what perspective would you like to leave in terms of recycling or the circular economy, and any tip that you can leave us in order to make that happen in our companies?
Yeah, I mean, I would really want to sort of stress the matter of urgency. I think, I'm a big advocate also of ESG, because I do believe that more longer term, it will enable systems change. But ultimately, it's not just about reporting on ESG or getting a good ESG rating, right? It's really what really matters are those initiatives and the kind of change that we're seeing within companies. And I think that is just really important that we show those concrete results. So with regard to the circular economy, I think it's a huge opportunity for businesses. There's actually several studies that have put this into the sort of the multi-trillion-dollar size opportunity in the next decade. So yeah, complying will maybe save you some costs. But if you're actually going to be progressive and entrepreneurial, then I think the advantage is going to be much greater. So yeah, my sort of call to action would be to go above and beyond and to really rethink like every kind of business model that you're currently doing, and to think about it from not only like a plastics but also a climate perspective on how this could be different and how you'd envision this 10 years from now.
Thank you, Vincent. And Toni, my question to you is, what would be your ask, or how do you think an organization such as MAP, can work more closely with the National Resiliency Council, or the things that you have been doing? How can MAP contribute, or any other business organization work more closely with you? Toni? Toni, you're muted. You're muted.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much for that question, Alex. I think that there are great opportunities here for the private corporations to actually work with the National Resilience Council, particularly on looking beyond mitigation, energy efficiency, pollution, waste management, but looking also at the root causes and drivers of exposure and vulnerability in terms of the risk landscape. And that's both social as well as ecological. And I think that there's a great mine of technical expertise that could be applied to solving larger problems that go beyond the fence lines of corporations, that actually then would affect their overall contribution to GDP. That might not be immediately accountable or quantifiable, but at the end of the day, when you invest in area-based resilience, for example, in the way we've been looking at the geographies of risk at the local government level, there are impacts on your efficiencies in terms of your operations, the way you actually care for your employees and your compliance, but also on the resilience of communities, of the ecosystem. And so we'd be very, very appreciative of any interest in terms of working with us, really to develop science and technology-based decision support systems for both risk management within the corporations and the resilience of the communities within which you all operate. So we're hoping that that may be of interest to members of MAP, as well as to other partners and networks that you have as well.
Indeed.
Thank you.
And thank you, Toni, Vincent, and Andrew. And as for me, I just like to share a brief perspective. That ESG, I find, is the closest thing to making a corporation feel like a human being. On the E, because a corporation is a juridical person, and then the E, it feels the pain of Mother Earth, and it asks us to take care of our Mother Earth so that the Earth can take care of us better. On the S, it requires corporations or as juridical persons to care for our fellow men, and caring for our fellow men outside of our first families. And on the governance side, it's really about mastery over oneself. And I guess that ESG just brought a brand new definition of the term juridical person. It's almost equivalent to being a juridical being. Thank you once again, Andrew, Toni, and Vincent. Fantastic interaction, fantastic conversation this afternoon. And I turn over the floor to Agnes.
Thank you very much, Alex. Definitely insightful, interesting, and eye-opening. Thank you, Mr. Chan, Mr. KNEEFEL, and Ms. LOYZAGA for your time and your expertise with us today. President Fred, before we adjourn, do you have any parting words?
Well, I'd like to add my thanks to our speakers for opening new vistas, new ideas, new perspectives. But integrating ESG into business will happen only if it makes business sense. After all, businesses have their role to play in the economy, and it's important that they are able to create value. I think integrating ESG will become more realistic if business managers will shift their perspective from short-term profitability to long-term enterprise value creation and long-term survival, long-term sustainability of the business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe and healthy. See you on June 23. for our next MAP General Membership meeting on the ICT leadership in the new normal via Zoom. This MAP GMM is now adjourned. Good afternoon, everyone.